Hello, welcome to homework 5.02. So this is going to be a lot of getting kind of y's by itself, doing some graphing, focusing on what we call slope-intercept form. So the instructions at the top, put each of the following equations into slope-intercept form, which is basically a fancy way of saying get the y by itself. All right, we've got to isolate the y and get it on one side all by itself. So if we look at this first one here, the only thing preventing the y from being by itself is that pesky -6. So that's -6 times y, so the opposite of multiplying by -6 is just to divide everything by -6. These will cancel out and we'll be left with y equals, careful here, negative divided by a negative is going to turn that into a positive 4. And then here we have a positive divided by a negative, so that's going to make that a minus 2x. All right, so that's what we call slope-intercept form. Just a reminder that the one without the x is your y-intercept, and then the one with the x is your slope. So in this case, your y-intercept would be 4, your slope would be -2. All right, let's take a look at the second one here. We're going to have to do a little more work because this time we've got to take care of the 3x and we've got to take care of the -5. So just like equations, we're going to start with the addition and the subtraction before we do any division. So we want to move this 3x from the left to the right. So the opposite of a positive 3x is a -3x. These are going to cancel out. We're left with -5y equals, again, we cannot combine these because they're not like terms, 16 minus 3x. Okay. Now we're kind of where we were on the first problem. Just to get rid of that -5, it's -5 times y. So we'll divide everything by -5. All right, these will cancel out. You'll get y equals. Now, depending on what you do, if you divide this, you're going to see that you get a decimal. All right, you're going to get 3.2. A lot of times with graphing, we're going to leave things as fractions. It's not as important with the intercept, but for the slope especially, we kind of want to leave it as a fraction. So we're just going to get in the habit of that. So again, if we did this on our calculator, I'm going to just show it to you on the calculator. 16 divided by -5 is that -3.2 that I said it would be, but oftentimes we're just going to math frac that, so hit the math key and then turn it back to a fraction, and in this case it just goes straight back to being -16 over 5. So that's how we're going to write it, at least on this homework. So I'm going to go y equals -16 over 5, and then here negative divided by a negative is going to turn that into a positive 3 over 5x. Okay, so that's going to be our final one here. And then again, this one would be our y-intercept because it doesn't have the x next to it. This one right here would be the slope because it is next to the x. Okay, let's take a look at number 3. All right, so number 3, they're trying to trick us by putting the y on the right-hand side, but not really an issue. All right, we're still trying to get the y by itself, which means I need to get rid of this -12, and I need to get rid of this 7. All right, I don't change it just because it's on the other side. I'm still following the same procedure. So opposite of -12 is +12. Not going to be able to combine these because they're not like terms, so I'll just write that as 4x plus 12 equals 7y. And then I'll divide both sides by 7. Okay. Again, if you do these on your calculator, you're going to get ugly decimals. You can math frac them, or I'm just going to show you what they're going to turn out to be as fractions. This one's going to be 4 over 7x plus 12 over 7. All right, so that's going to be the fractional form of those, equals y. And if it really bothers you to have the y on the right-hand side, you can take that extra step and just rewrite it and say, all right, this is 4/7 x plus 12 over 7. And then again, this is the one next to the x, so that would be our slope. And then this one right here would be our y-intercept because it does not have the x next to it. Okay, last question on the front here. 16y plus 7 equals 3x minus 1. All right, so again, we're trying to get the y by itself, which means we need to get rid of the 7, and we need to get rid of the 16. So to get rid of the 7, we're going to subtract 7 from both sides. Now this one's a little different because now we do have a like term. We can't combine it with the 3, but we can combine it with this minus 1 because those are like terms. Neither of them have x's. So these will cancel out. We'll have 16y equals 3x. And then what we're doing here is we're really doing negative 1 minus 7. So negative 1 minus 7 is going to be more negative and work out to be negative 8. So if we divide everything by 16, divide by 16, divide by 16, this one's going to become y equals, this is just going to stay 3 over 16x. And then you might be saying, well, can I just leave the other one as 8 over 16? But if we do that on the calculator, if we go, all right, negative 8 divided by 16, that gives us a 0.5, which if we math frac 0.5 is actually going to be a minus 1/2. Okay. So that's going to be minus 1/2. So you can't just always assume that it's going to be those same two numbers. Sometimes the fraction reduces, and you want to make sure that you capture that in your answer. Again, it's not wrong to put the decimal, but just some of the decimals get long, some of the decimals are repeating, so we just kind of emphasize just keeping everything as a fraction. All right, let's take a look at the back. Graph using the slope and y-intercept. So I'm actually going to show you both ways when we do these because we encourage kids to do whichever way they're most comfortable with. So I'll show you the slope and the y-intercept way, and then I'll also show you the table method. Okay, so regardless of what method we use, the first thing we need to do is get the y by itself. So in our case, that's going to mean getting rid of the 3x and getting rid of this negative 2 here. So to get rid of the 3x, I'm going to start by subtracting 3x from both sides. These will cancel out. I'm left with negative 2y equals 4 minus 3x. Then my last step is going to be to divide both sides by negative 2. Negative 2, negative 2. So this will end up being y equals 4 divided by negative 2 is negative 2. Here we have a negative divided by a negative, so that's going to become a positive 3 over 2x. So using the slope and the y-intercept, we know this one is the y-intercept because it's the one without the x, and we know this one is our slope. So the y-intercept is where we start our graph. So this would say that on the y-axis, which is the up and down axis, we would start at negative 2. So the up and down is our y-intercept is negative 2, so that's where our line crosses the y-axis. It crosses the y-axis at negative 2. So that's kind of telling us where we can start when making our graph. Now the slope is telling us how we move. All right, and how we move is kind of the phrase that you'll usually hear is rise over run. So the top number is telling us how much we go up and down, and the bottom number is how much we're telling us we go left and right. So when we have a 3 over 2, since those are both positive, it means we're going to go up 3 and to the right 2, because positives are always up and positives go to the right when we're graphing. Now, the part that ends up being confusing for kids is the slope is sort of backwards of graphing points. When we graph a point, we start with the left to right and then move up and down. When we're doing a slope, we usually start with the up and down and then move left to right. So you have to keep those two straight because a lot of times once kids do slope a lot, they start confusing how to graph points. But in our case, we're not going to confuse it. We're going to say, all right, our rise is up 1, 2, 3. And our run is over 1, 2. and then once we get our next point, from there we do the same thing. Up 1, 2, 3, over 1, 2, up 1, 2, 3, over 1, 2, up 1, 2, 3, over 1, 2. And then we can actually do the exact opposite, all right? We can go down 1, 2, 3, back 1, 2. Down 1, 2, 3, back 1, 2. And then we're kind of out of room, so I'm just going to stop there. All right, and what we're going to see is this is what we call a positive slope. Because if you look at it left to right, the way we read a book, it's going up. Positive slopes, when you look at them left to right, the same way we read a book, are always going to be heading kind of upwards in an upward direction. So I can combine these or connect these. Notice I'm not stopping at the last point. I'm going all the way through it. I'm going to make an arrow on both sides. And then last but not least, I'm going to put a label on it, which is 3x minus 2y equals 4. I'm just going to use the original equation. 3x minus 2y equals 4. All right? So that is the slope-intercept way of graphing it. Some kids prefer to use a table. And again, in our class, it's really whatever you're most comfortable with. So if you're using the table method, you would just need your graphing calculator. You would go to your y equals, and you would type in the equation that you came up with after you solved for y. So in our case, that was negative 2 plus, and then we're going to put our fractions in parentheses, 3 divided by 2, x. So we're doing the same thing. We're just kind of putting it into our calculator. We'll go to second graph, and then this will give us a whole table of values. All right, so we make our little table, x, y. I usually like to pick positives and negatives. So let's see. I aim for like at least 4 points. So why don't we use negative 2, negative 5. We'll skip the ones that have decimals. So then we'll use 0, negative 2. Then we'll use 2, comma 1. And we'll use 4, comma 4. And what you're going to see is if we graph these points that we just wrote, they're all going to be on the line I just made because both ways give us the same answer. Like if I do a negative 2, negative 5, remember with points we do the x first, so that would be back 1, 2, and then down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And look at that, it's right on the line that we already made. And the same thing is going to happen for any of these points. Let's say I do 2, comma 1. Remember when we do points, we start with the x, so over 1, 2. Up 1, and look at that, it's right on the line. So either technique will give you the same answer, it's just whatever you're most comfortable with. All right, let's take a look at another one here. Negative 3y equals 12x minus 9. So this one, the only thing we have to get rid of is that negative 3. So we'll divide everything by a negative 3. These will cancel out, and we're left with y equals, that's going to be negative 4x. And then a negative divided by a negative is going to be a positive 3. So here's our y-intercept, which again is where we start. And here is our slope, which is how we move. Now what can be a little confusing about this one is I said slope is rise over run, but we don't actually have a fraction here. We just have a negative 4. What we can do is we can turn that into a fraction. Negative 4 is the same as negative 4 over 1, which means in our case we're going to be going down 4 because our top number is negative, and we're going to go to the right 1 because our bottom number is positive. All right, so let's take a look at what that's actually going to work out to be. So the y-intercept is a positive 3, so that's where it hits our y-axis. So I'm going to start up 1, 2, 3. And then our slope is a negative 4 over 1. So that's telling us to go down 4 and over 1. Down 1, 2, 3, 4, over 1. Down 1, 2, 3, 4, over 1. Down 1, 2, 3, 4, over 1. And just like above, we can also do the exact opposite. We can go up 1, 2, 3, 4, and back 1. All right, and either way will work. We're then going to connect our points, making sure that we go through the points and don't just stop at the last one. So there's our line. We're going to throw a label on that using the original equation. So negative 3y equals 12x minus 9. And what you'll see is this one has a negative slope, which means when we read it left to right, again, the same way we read a book, it's going downhill, as opposed to up here, when we went left to right, it was sort of going uphill. Now again, if you use a table, let me just kind of show you how that'll work. We'll bring the calculator back out. All right, we'll go to our y equals. We'll clear out what was in there, and we'll replace it with our new one, which was negative 4x plus 3. Second graph, we'll bring up the table. And then you're going to see again, I've got a lot of the same, these points are the same exact points I've already graphed. So if I make my XY table, I'm just going to pick 4 points. I'm going to get some negatives and positives. And I'm going to stay away from ones that have really big numbers, because the more lines you have to count, the more likely you are to make a mistake. So I'll go negative 1, 7. I'll do 0, 3. I'll do 1, negative 1. And 2, negative 5. Okay. And again, you'll see that these points that I just wrote down, all of them are going to show up on the graph. So let's just go over here and test one of them out. If I do 2, negative 5, all right, remember when we're doing a point, we start with the x, so that's over 2 and down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And look at that, it's landing right on our graph, just like all of these will. 1, negative 1, that's over 1 and down 1. So no matter what method you use, you're going to end up with the same line. Okay, so that's it for this homework. I hope this was some help. Have a nice day.